Hi, everybody. This is Dr. K. In our case of the week, we're going to talk about Nikki today. And Nikki is a 10-year-old female, and we're changing all of this to protect the child's identity. But this was a real life patient of mine that came to see me because this child was having intense behaviors and emotionality and reactivity, and everything was getting under her skin, and everything was a big deal to Nikki, and she was just emotional and reactive and unable to regulate herself. And the mom is like, I don't know what's going on. Like, what is happening to my child? And, the funny thing is that in today's world, despite our advancements in medicine and technology, there are so many things that we just normalize, that we just say, well, some kids have big emotions, right? Some kids just are this way. Some kids just react. And when it gets bad enough, what do? We diagnose them with an anxiety disorder or ADHD or, whatever other term. But that does not help us understand why someone behaves and acts the way they do, right? And when you really look at cases like Nikki, what are these behaviors? They're ultimately tantrums, right? If you look at what a 2 or 3-year-old does, right? 2 or 3-year-olds, when something happens, things don't go their way, they have these meltdowns and everything bothers some 2-year-olds, except not all 2-year-olds, right? And then there are the 2-minute tantrums, and then there are the 35-minute tantrums. And if you're a parent who had the misfortune of having a child who had 35-minute tantrums, I'm sure you're like, oh, yeah, I remember those. Except what's really interesting is that in some kids, these tantrums never go away. And in the case of Nikki, she was one of those individuals that really never resolved the 2 or 3-year-old tantrums. So what are these issues? Why is it that some people have these big emotions, as we call them? What causes some individuals, and there are adults, there are some of you adults who are still having tantrums. And you know what? To be frankly speaking, when I'm not well, when I am unhealthy, when I haven't taken care of myself, I experience what feels like a tantrum, except I have the self-control to be like, oh my God, I'm having a tantrum. And, I have to kind of contain it within. But the whole purpose of this discussion of Nikki is for us to stand back and ask that question, what at our physiological level would ultimately cause this thing, the brain, to be in such a volatile state where little things become huge things? What causes emotional instability to the point where we have what looks like a tantrum in an 11-year-old? And in the case of Nikki, it was actually really simple. So we ran some blood work, and you don't necessarily need to, but she ended up having one of the worst cases of an adrenal imbalance that I had seen in a very, very long time. And how you know if there's an adrenal imbalance is actually really simple. Despite a really good night's rest, and for someone like Nikki, it would be about 10 hours, you still wake up irritable or tired in the morning. Some individuals take a long time to get going in the mornings. That's actually one of the first telltale signs. So presuming there's no sleep apnea, presuming there's no choking, gagging, loud snoring while we sleep, presuming you've gotten enough sleep, people who have an adrenal imbalance are really slow to get going in the mornings, and they need a long time to really piece themselves together. And if you disrupt that, they actually become sometimes irritable or agitated, especially in the children. Another telltale sign is in the younger individuals, around 2 to 4 o'clock, which is typically the time that school ends, they're very either irritable. So they come home from school, but they're agitated and they're irritable and they're crabby, or they're tired. And I have some patients, 10, 12 years old, they actually fall asleep in the car coming home. And the parents are like, yeah, he or she still needs a nap in afternoons. And while we're driving home for like 20 minutes, they take a little cat nap and then they wake up. I'm like, that's interesting. The other thing is, and this is another really telltale sign, is that a lot of these individuals, so morning slump, afternoon slump, and then what happens in the evening? All of a sudden, it's like they had 15 shots of coffee. And then they're just wired awake and they can't wind down, and you have to give them melatonin or magnesium or whatever. And that is actually part of their physiology. So when we wake up in the mornings, the body needs cortisol to get going. Cortisol is actually what wakes us up in the mornings. There's a massive search. And if you do a search for cortisol curve during the day, or diurnal cortisol curve, if you want to get really fancy, you'll actually see the body produces a ton of cortisol. In the afternoons, it kind of slumps down. And in the afternoon slump, if your cortisol drops below a certain point, you actually get really tired, which then causes the body to give you a kick of adrenaline, which then actually recharges the body, but in an unhealthy way. So what did we do for Nikki? What was the magic plan? So I ended up giving Nikki an adrenal mix, which is basically blackcurrant. And for those of you that are interested, on our store.holistickids.com, or if you just go to Holistic Kids, we actually have it available with the dosing there. But you can also buy just blackcurrant or ribes nigrum directly from Amazon, Pure Formulas. There's a ton of websites that sell it. We basically gave Nikki a specialized adrenal mix. And we also did a little bit of metabolic support, because typically what I've found is for the kids who are most affected by their adrenal glands, typically they have an underlying metabolic issue. And we did this. And what was really cool, and this is why I love working with kids like Nikki, and frankly all my patients, is a month later I checked in with the mom. I'm like, so how is she doing? And the mom's like, oh my God, she's a different kid. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, we don't have any more of the meltdowns. I'm like, are you serious? She's like, yeah. We don't have any more of the meltdowns. She's so much more reasonable. She's not reactive. Not everything bothers her. Not everything gets under her skin. She doesn't have the meltdowns and the issues that she had before. I'm like, that's awesome. And she's like, yeah, I know. But you see, what we did was not change Nikki. The version of Nikki the mom is now seeing is actually the true version of Nikki. The version of Nikki the mom was seeing before was the fatigued, run down, exhausted, lack of vitality Nikki. And she was struggling. Nikki was struggling, and she was acting out because she didn't feel well. Nikki was exhausted. And she was exhausted because at a core cellular, physiological, hormonal level, she was depleted. And these are the kinds of things we don't see. This is what's lacking in our medicine. We're so quick to label individuals. We're so quick to say, well, you have an anxiety disorder. You've got fatigue syndrome. But we don't ever stop and ask, well, what is happening at the core physiological level that is causing this human being to be this way? And, frankly speaking, I've had multiple adolescents come in with the diagnosis of depression, except they weren't depressed. There was nothing going on in their life that would explain why they would be depressed. They acted depressed. They looked like they were depressed. Why? Because physiologically, they had zero reserves. If your car wouldn't start because your gas tank is empty, would you label your car as, oh, my car is depressed? No, you go put gasoline in the car and then get the car the fuel it needs to run. There are human beings, there are children, there are people who have the equivalent of an empty gas tank. And they are so physiologically depleted, they are so physiologically exhausted that they can't function. And how that lack of functioning shows up as is what we call depression. If Nikki was a little bit older and things had gotten a little bit worse, chances are she would have been diagnosed with either depression or anxiety or both. And the whole purpose of these discussions is for us to start really standing back and saying, God, why does this person feel completely depleted even though they've slept an adequate amount of time? Why are they tired all the time? Why do they lack energy? Why do they lack resiliency? And when we can start having these discussions and asking these questions and understanding these things, the answers become very easy. You can buy these metabolic supplements anywhere, and they're not that expensive. You can buy blackcurrant or our adrenal mix anywhere. I mean, our adrenal mix is through our store, but you can buy these products. They're available. All these tools are available, and they can make such a difference in the lives of the person who needs them. But in order for us to even understand who needs them, we need to start by just having the conversations of the fact that these things exist. And I have no problems with, the diagnosis of anxiety. I have no problem with the use of medications. I think in some cases they're fantastic. They can make such a world of difference in some people. I do have a problem with us jumping and making these diagnoses without asking the question of, could there be something else going on? And I can't tell you how many times I've had kids come to me who have horrible physiological problems, celiac disease, metabolic issues that are so bad that these poor kids can't move. And we are just medicating them because we don't know what else to do. And that's the whole point of this discussion, for us to start talking about what else is there that we can do? How else can we look at these issues so we can make a big difference in the lives of these kids and their families? So I thank you for watching, and I thank you for being a part of this community, and I thank you for helping get these messages out to all of the families who need to hear this information. Be well. This is Dr. K. Bye-bye.